Well, welcome to our live web talk on the future of work. I'm very sorry about the delay. We had some technical difficulties, but welcome to the conversation. My name is Peter Rosenbaum, and I am the Executive Director of the New York office of the University Alliance Ruhr, a consortium of 3 German universities, Ruhr University Bochum, TU Dortmund University, and the University of Duisburg-Essen. This is a time when we think quite a bit about innovative solutions to the challenges that we currently face. And in fact, just yesterday, as part of the Climate Week New York City, we organized a conversation about what ideas are out there to make urban mobility more sustainable. If you haven't done so yet, I would like to encourage you to check out their fascinating program this week with more than 500 events. The website is climateweeknewyorkcity.org. Today's conversation is part of our very own series of talks on COVID-19 and the future of our cities, a series that brings together urban planners, community leaders, and policymakers, as well as experts in fields such as public health, sociology, logistics, and transportation, to help us understand how COVID-19 will affect how we think about the city of tomorrow and the future of work is an important topic of that conversation, as it touches on so many aspects of our lives. Before introducing our speakers, I would like to acknowledge our partner organizations that helped us put together today's event. They are ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the Urban Transition Alliance, the German Consulate General in New York, and the German Center for Research and Innovation, whose program manager is with us today. Dietrich, turning it over to you.
Just a sec.
So can you hear me now?
I can hear you
now.
Yes.
So the future of work just started now. Good morning, everyone from the German Center for Research and Innovation in New York. And thank you so much, Peter, for the kind introduction. We are very proud to be the co-host today for COVID-19 and the future of our cities. The future of work, as I said, just started 6 months ago when we learned to do events like this virtually. The German Center for Research and Innovation usually showcases German innovations, science and research in the US. And we are doing that together with amazing 17 partners here in the US, universities, industries, but also science centers. One of the partners is the University Alliance Ruhr with the notorious Peter Rosenbaum. We are doing, in the moment, event a day with him. So he's very busy and we try to keep up. I'm looking forward to the discussion today, to the pressing topic of the future of work. And to make it short and sweet, I'm handing over to another partner who's jumping on my seat right now. It's Yasmin Pamuk, Head of Cultural Affairs and Science at the General Consulate, and she's our partner in disguise for science diplomacy.
Thank you so much, Dietrich. Yes, good morning on my part as well. In 1953, a publication titled Applied Imagination described a revolutionary new concept to the world, that of brainstorming. The author, Alex Osborne, an advertising executive, introduced this new creative methodology for problem solving that would allow discussing ideas and arriving ultimately at the best solution. Today, the creative technique of brainstorming has become part of our daily lexicon in nearly all spheres of not only work, but also life. The expression itself has been introduced into many other languages, sometimes a little bit awkward, and cultures of work. Amid widespread shelter-in-space orders during the COVID-19, we are facing a similar turn in our work culture. New employees will not be greeted with a balloon at their desk anymore, nor will team lunches on the corporate card take place anytime soon. Working remotely has become the new normal. The considerable changes in our work life may cause hopes of new flexibility and opportunities, as well as fears of being absorbed by this accelerated, huge digital transformation that we are experiencing in our work life at the moment. In a recent poll, the Economist Intelligence Unit found that 37% of rank-and-file employees reported that well-implemented workplace, physical workplace, mind you, technology had a positive impact not only on their experience, but also on their decision to work for a company or not to work for it. With the pandemic forcing us to reconsider everything from mobile device security to workplace culture, a thorough consideration of the future of work is not only just nice to have, but a critical mission for employers, organizations, as well as for social science researchers. I'm therefore most delighted to welcome you to this third part of the Transatlantic Conversation series on COVID-19 and the future of our cities, hosted by our cherished partner organizations, the University Alliance Ruhr, the Urban Transitions Alliance, Local Governments for Sustainability, and last but not least, the German Center for Research and Innovation. Today's live web talk will deal with the key challenges and opportunities of facing our future of work. The distinguished panel will discuss the impact of the accelerated digital transformation of work that redefines the meaning of work and workplace as such, but also raises concerns with view to social security issues, such as guarantees of equal pay, health insurance, and work-life balance, of course. I very much look forward to the discussion and give back the floor to Peter. Peter.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. I'll be very quick, and I feel very privileged to be able to introduce such a wonderful panel of experts. And a big thank you also, by the way, to Rebecca Wessinghage, who is with us, who represents ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. Thank you, Rebecca, for your excellent work. We have today Grant Ervin, the Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Pittsburgh. Also joining us from Pittsburgh is Ray Gastil. Ray is the director of the Remaking Cities Institute at Carnegie Mellon and holds the David Lewis Heinz Endowments Directorship of Urban Design and Regional Engagement. And Ray will also be the moderator of our conversation. Ute Klammer is the director of the Institute for Work, Skills and Training at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. Michael Leichner works for the city administration in Dortmund, Germany, where he is the head of climate protection, air pollution control, and noise abatement. And last but not least, Samantha Mauro-Fox is an assistant professor of urban anthropology at Lehigh University. Thank you all so very much for joining us today and for introducing us to what the future of work might have in store for us. Before turning it over to Ray, let me remind everyone to please use the chat function for questions and comments. We will try to fold them into our conversation or at the very latest during Q&A. We have a big panel today, so if we are not able to answer your questions, my apologies, but we will provide you with my email address in the chat, and I will make sure to forward your questions to the speakers. Thank you very much for joining us today. Ray, the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter and Dietrich and Yasmin. And we've gotten a great introduction, and Yasmin has promised that we'll be doing brainstorming today. So we've had an opportunity to do a little bit of brainstorming preparing for this talk, and we're going to try and capture some of that live with you, and then by you fielding questions, which we're going to find we'll be able to be part of that brainstorming as well. We're going to start I'll be asking a sort of single question to each of the speakers, and then we'll get to your questions after that, soon after that. So what I wanted to start with was actually, since they've already been introduced, I'll just go straight to Michael Leichner, Head of Climate Protection, Air Pollution Control and Noise Abatement for the City of Dortmund. So, Michael, could you take a moment to describe how remote work and the right to do remote work is now becoming part of the normal and legislatively part of the city of Dortmund for its own team of around 11,000 employees, but also it's becoming a driving issue for Germany as a whole in terms of the workforce. I wondered if you could comment on that.
Okay. Thank you, Ray, for introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity to join this video conference. I'm coming to a question to describe how remote work in the city administration will be done. The city administration of Dortmund now enables its employees to work about 50% of their time remotely. This has to be orchestrated in a process for each department so that the task can continue to be carried out in full. And the federal government is currently planning also a legal regulation for home office. Due to this corona crisis pandemic, many companies, of course, had to convert to home office from now on. And our labor minister, Hubertus Heil, wants to establish a law for the right to work from home. And he said words like this: everyone who wants to and whose workplace allows it should be able to work from home, even when the corona pandemic is over again. That's the situation around Germany. And the question to becoming normal for the city of Dortmund, the remote work, it's like this, that firstly, the technical infrastructure needs, of course, to be developed for this. This goes hand in hand with a decision for a comprehensive digitization program in the city administration of Dortmund. And digitization projects such as this remote working, collaboration fast, citizens accessibility will be implemented, and taking into account the current experience of the pandemic. And what is needed, therefore, is a future-proof and, of course, a secure IT system based on, let me say, proven standards, so that a modern workplace can be created for the employees. And the last question, I think, was like, how will this impact the work of the city? This remote work was in the city of Dortmund tested in specialized areas. And the overall very positive experience gained in these pilot areas led the city to this wide framework service agreement. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You know, it's interesting. You struck on there's a technical problem, but there's also a management problem, and there's also a sort of a desire of the workforce challenge. And I was wondering, Uta, who is director of the Institute for Work, Skills and Training at the University of Duisburg-Essen. I'm wondering, Professor Klammer, if you could have tell us a little bit about the management side of this, especially in terms of like the leadership and management of the workforce, how they're grappling with this idea that all of their workforce will have a right to work from home, as well as their own interactions at a sort of in the C-suite, as they say. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Just to add on what Michael already said about Germany, we had a very big change during the lockdown, COVID-19 lockdown in Germany in how we work here. Before the COVID-19 crisis, Germany was really a latecomer in remote work, and we have data showing us that in 1980, for example, only about 12% of all employees worked more than half of the working hours in remote work, and this was less, by far less, than in other European countries such as the Scandinavian countries or Netherlands, Luxembourg, Great Britain, due to the old industries in Germany. And we know that many more employees, even in that time, would have liked to do remote work, and for different reasons they didn't have the opportunity. During the lockdown, the number or the share of people in remote work went up to 35%, and many companies were not well prepared for this. This concerned both the equipment of home office or remote work, the technical equipment, digitization and so on, where Germany is a kind of laggard or latecomer, but also well, management was really, as you said, management was not really well prepared for the new requirements of leadership, leading in a home office workforce. And in fact, it requires a lot of rethinking what leadership and management means, like you have to decide who can work in home office and who cannot work, and you have to communicate this with your workforce. You have to look for collegial contacts between colleagues. How can you organize it? We know that work is much more than just doing your work for the company. It also means having contacts to colleagues. How can you organize this if everybody works at home? And last but not least, we know that employees are very there's a big uncertainty about what is required of me. When do I have to be available? They tend to do overtime to show that they are really willing to do good work in remote work, and this really requires rethinking leadership in times of remote work. And this is something we have to talk about more than we did in the past.
Right, and it sounds like you don't think we're going back, as well as from Michael. It's like these were trends that were already there, and actually maybe Germany not at the cutting edge of the trend, a little behind, but this COVID and so forth basically pushed trends. What was already happening accelerated it in many ways, and there's positives, negatives, and neutrals. But one of the things you touched on, and I'm going to turn to Samantha about this, is the question of the sort of informal contacts. You know, the sort of the whole picture of what a work day is like and how you interact with people. Because often in urbanism, as well as in management work, there's a sort of a density of interaction is a standard, like how many points of contact you have, and how does that actually help the workplace in ways that are not necessarily structured meetings and structured tasks and so forth. Those kind of also just sort of the social and well-being of employees, managers, or the line workforce. So Samantha, I was wondering if you could talk about this a little bit. I know that in your work you're looking at residential neighborhoods and how, with the concentration of folks, you know, spending so much more time in the residential neighborhood, that some of the ways people get together during the workday are changing. And I know you have some interesting lines of research on this, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, this is something that, you know, it's still sort of yet to be seen how things are going to shake out. But one of the things that's interesting as remote work becomes normalized is that, first of all, we have the opportunity of white collar workers, at least, to be able to live sort of anywhere. And so that poses an opportunity for revitalization in areas that may not have been able to have, you know, very strong tax bases and so on. And at the same time, the idea of the flight from cities has been very overblown in the media. You know, in New York City, where I live, there's been a lot of talk about like the super rich going to their country homes, but in actuality, the, you know, regular people of New York City and of cities nationwide have not been leaving, and the sort of city suburb divide has actually relatively remained where it was pre-pandemic. And part of that, I think, speaks to the fact that people want to be in proximity to each other, that social isolation is, you know, something that is to be avoided, and yet is also a sort of unintended consequence of remote work. And so there are sort of two consequences to that. One, is the rise in rural areas of sort of walkable, proximate neighborhoods. So something that I've been working on, for instance, is the Erie Canal revitalization efforts from New York State, where one of the pilot projects that's getting off the ground right now is called the Canastota Pocket neighborhood, which is, you know, where people can live in, you know, outside of a city in close proximity to nature, and yet also have neighbors nearby with whom they share some communal resources and so on, to sort of approximate some of that communitarian living that happens in cities. but also in Germany, in the city where I do my research, which is called Eisenhüttenstadt, there was during the socialist era a real emphasis on building communal spaces within apartment buildings, such that your sort of apartment was your primary social network, and you would go have coffee with your neighbors and play cards and so on. And it's interesting now that I live in the US to see that that is really marketed as an amenity for luxury buildings, to have the luxury of being able to, interact with your neighbors in communal spaces. But I do wonder, as, okay, so maybe, for instance, right now we're not using those kinds of communal spaces because of the need to socially distance, but if post-pandemic people are working from home, the office then is no longer your primary social network, but rather the neighborhood and potentially the apartment building. And you think about, who do you go, get a coffee with throughout the day? Is it going to be your neighbor who's sharing the communal workspace with you in your apartment building, or is it going to be, a colleague who's working across the country? I think we stand to see a real shift in the importance of sort of neighborhood social networks in that way.
Well, it's interesting, a lot of work has been done on the third place, the place that isn't your workplace, isn't your home, and kind of in a way what you're suggesting is that sometimes a housing development builds in its own third places, and that those are rising in importance because people are not going to the office. So they don't stop at the third place on the way home, they're already there. And so it's really interesting to see how it develops and look through the history. That this is there's work and management of work and all the consequences of the virtual platforms, but it also has spatial and physical implications. And I know all of you are interested in that and have something to talk about that. But Grant, you've been talking about the spatial implications on the street for one thing. Just even in your, you also, like Michael, are part of a city workforce and the leadership. And you also, so you're very familiar with that, but you also in your own neighborhood, you've noted that there's been a kind of a change, and not necessarily all negative in terms of, in some of the same ways that Samantha's finding some potential, at least effective and things that work for human interaction, let's say, happening in this situation. So maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, kind of building off of Samantha's comments a little bit, is that as we have repositioned where we work, particularly, the administrative team here in the city, your orientation changes. So instead of, a 30 to 45 minute commute that I used to have into our central business district, I have, a 5-minute commute up the steps that usually gets interrupted by Legos or some toy that's sitting on the step. But what has happened is a lot of those interactions that I have throughout the day are either virtual like this. So that kind of, I think one of the things that's been a misnomer has been this idea of social distancing. We've had physical distancing, but in many cases, more social interaction. It's just being virtual. But those physical interactions are now being orientated to our, in my case, neighborhood business districts. So I live in a small neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh that doesn't have a major commercial stretch, that has had, I would say, a district that has struggled over time. But in the course of the last, I would say probably 9 to 12 months, it's almost 90% occupied. And what's happening is, we have the coffee shop and the restaurant and the beauty salon and the barber shop and the local's doctor's office, but we're also seeing an influx of small artisans. A sewing shop, a chocolatier has moved in. So folks that are, in need of kind of small, flexible space to produce or provide their service. We also just had an acupuncturist and a florist move in. So there's this reorientation in terms of space away from, I don't want to say away from the central business district, but we're finding a rebirth in neighborhood business districts as that population that was typically working in the central business district is now many cases working from home, or people are looking for more expensive, or less expensive, more flexible space. So that has been one of the things, and we've kind of touched upon, like in previous conversations, the concept of the 15-minute city, and the idea that you have these simple services within your close proximity that you can walk or bike to. And it's interesting to see this kind of dynamic shift. The good thing I would say in a place like in Pittsburgh, we've seen a growth in people living in our central business district. So that still has remained, while more vacant because of less office workers, still buoyant, you know, and somewhat healthy, although not what it is optimal. The other thing, in addition to kind of this localization, I just want to touch upon quickly too, is this idea of the quality of place is also very important. So the idea not just that you are in close proximity to services, but also in close proximity to environmental amenities. You know, so whether it's a small neighborhood park or, you know, open green space has become very important, I think, as kind of an additional, you know, using the term you had there, Ray, about the third place, a place where small groups of people can congregate safely, has become very important. And you know, just from an environmental standpoint too, it's been so interesting to note, particularly during that time of lockdown, and just kind of going on to Michael's job position title, the lack of noise in our neighborhood because of the lack of traffic, or the crispness and the quality and improvement in air quality, are all things that I think people have resonated and kind of rediscovered in their neighborhoods, which is fascinating.
Great. So speaking of which, I was thinking that there's one thing, there's different impacts. It's not by mistake that the shared workspace across the street from me is called Beauty Shop. You know, the name of it is trying to capture what both you and Samantha were talking about, that it's a place of interaction that is, okay, I think, but I'm going to throw this out, since you are prognosticators in some part. Does anyone think there's a future for shared workspaces? Putting aside WeWork, you know, WeWork was like a unicorn that lost its horn. But let's see what, you know, but I mean, I'll actually start with Uto. This is the focus of her every day, is looking at not this particular issue, but the larger issues of what do you think will happen in to an entity like these shared workplaces? Because in some ways they could help build this positive image of a local neighborhood experience, even though it's beyond your home office. But there's also, even if COVID entirely recedes and so forth, there's this. But just wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think it's too early to give a general answer about how our working life will look like after COVID-19, and there will be a time, hopefully, after COVID-19. But it's quite sure that we will not go back to the old structures entirely. So I would assume we will have more remote work afterwards in any case, and we will be better equipped for doing remote work in branches that were not so fond of remote work before that. And of course, many companies now see a good option to save money by using remote work as part of their strategy, and they can save on money for office space, for example, and I'm sure they will try to do this. So we will certainly see a shift there, but we also have to be aware that we have different groups of people in the working population, and I would say in Germany at least we were able to see three big groups. One group, mainly the better qualified, mainly people in office work, they were able to go on working under different conditions, like mainly doing remote work. But there was a second big group made redundant, or in Germany, you might know, we have a quite good scheme for short-time working. So at the moment they get money for doing short-time work. It's publicly financed. but these jobs cannot simply be shifted to, in manufacturing, for example, they cannot be shifted to remote work. And then we have a third group, the heroes of COVID-19, people in healthcare, food retailing, and so on. They had to show more presence than ever. And these are jobs that cannot also, we have a big need of these jobs also for social all kind of social work. They will have to do their work dealing with people, and it cannot be done in remote work. So when we talk about remote work, this is something for special groups of the working population, in particular the better qualified white collar workers.
Thank you. And there's so many questions that come up, and I hope we get, there's some gender specific impacts you've talked about. There's also the whole question, you mentioned short-term work that's actually well compensated, but there's also the gig economy question that a lot of things to talk about. But so hope we get there, but I'm going to turn to a question for the audience. As we see the population drawing away from the central business district, do we see a similar pattern on campuses or a university? Campuses bring a lot of synergy to a city like Pittsburgh. How are city planners thinking about reorganizing the city for chance encounters, et cetera? So really sort of looking at impacts on thinking about downtown, but also thinking about the way that campuses, and certainly in cities like Pittsburgh and many others, that campus and the related activities become the core of effectively a CBD as well. So what do you think? Maybe I'll turn actually to Grant to start on this, since it's a question Pittsburgh oriented to start.
Yeah, I think one of the major challenges that we have to better understand is that, the relationship of universities, college towns, right? Or college cities in the case of a place like Pittsburgh, it's just a big college town. There's one component, which is the spatial orientation. And that is, the idea of creating these places of public open space and congregation. Our Oakland neighborhood, for example, has a great location, Schenley Plaza and Flagstaff Hill, which are kind of great opportunities for people from the variety of campuses that come together and be outside. And I think they've become more prominent as we've seen some of those students come back. The other challenge, though, is that physical business model of higher education really needs a deeper kind of understanding right now, in the sense of the ability to bring in populations in a physical capacity. And I think that's one of the deep kind of soul searching things that both cities and kind of their universities need to kind of work through together, and understanding what those implications, as much as the changing nature of work is happening literally right in front of our eyes, is the same thing happening for education. And that has, financial implications to it. So just to paint a little bit of a picture of it, in Pittsburgh, higher education, I think, is a little between 25 and 30% of GDP in terms of being an economic driver for the region. So if you're not bringing students in from around the country, around the region, around the world, that has a physical impact on infrastructure, on finances, and kind of the operating model. I think what we're hearing from a lot of educators, though, is that distance kind of is a challenge in the educational model. It works for something and not for others, but it really kind of calls into the question of like, how do we better utilize our physical space? Going back to your kind of question about like WeWork, for example, or the shared workspace, I do think that is a concept that is coming more into vogue, because we still need to have kind of physical interactions, I think, in terms of fostering productivity, in terms of building relationships, building trust. These are some of the main factors, I think, that we've seen kind of the fissures born throughout the pandemic, that we have to be able to bridge them together through physical connections and human connections.
Yeah. No, I want to follow up on one thing, though, that is actually another audience question, is that whether there's I know, Uda, you noted that there's a sort of categories of worker, and what we were talking about just now with Grant was actually sort of academic workers in a context, and then the sort of community around them. And while I like to think of professors as essential workers, that's not the issue. The COVID heroes, that is not the sort of question of essential workers that you brought up as a term. I don't know whether to use that term, but I think that was the implication. And and also the question, like, but what is? And I know that all of you have comments about this, but I'm going to start with. I'll start with Samantha, actually, because I wanted to. Do you think there's something in the workforce that, in response to our recognition of essential workers, that is going to get better? Because really, essential workers are the people who remote work is hard to get to be 50% of their time. It might only be 25%. And essential workers can be everyone from folks that are noted by Uta in her work about like a care worker to the ones that are in the front line at the hospital and our other services and maintaining our infrastructure. So Samantha, do you have any, I know you're looking at the big picture of this as an anthropologist at Lehigh, and just any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, as far as predicting the future, I think that it's very difficult right now to try to, give some sort of prognosis as to whether the situation in protections for workers and compensation and all of that will get better. I think that the only way that it can get better, I think we've seen is, I hate to say, like top-down governmental intervention. And that's one of the big differences, I think, between the US and Germany. And, I'm happy to have our German panelists weigh in here as well. But, at least when it comes to urban renewal projects, which is really the focus of my research, you see the German federal government intervene in ways that allow for larger scale change than you often find in the US, where things are, projects are enacted on a local level. And I think that there's a way in which, we come to recognize that essential workers are putting their lives at risk to a greater degree than people who are able to work remotely. And yet we're only compensated for that as we sort of get pandemic fatigue. The compensation, extra compensation for, hero work has sort of disappeared. And it seems as if, if we just leave things to private employers, there is a tendency towards exploitation. We see this in the gig economy, and we see this now with, supermarket cashiers, for instance, only having been paid extra for, the first, whatever it was, 6 or 8 weeks of the pandemic. So I think that unless there's real either social or governmental pressure to compensate essential workers for the dangers that they're putting themselves in, I don't really see anything changing.
Okay. Well, maybe I'd like to go to Michael and then to Uta on this. Michael, because I know this is something you've been thinking about as well, and then to Uta. You see something in the way that, whether it's direct compensation or some sort of, life improvements for essential workers that the city or other entities are looking at?
Of course, we have improvements for the essential workers. I mean, in terms that you're now able to remotely work 50% of the workspace, these are a lot of benefits. What you have now, there's, for example, a promotion of self-determination and self-responsibility of these employees now, and there's a reduction of a temporal stress factors, and I also think there's a sort of a health promotion through improved work-life balance in this factor, for example, and so the balance of central workers and remote workers are it's becoming better and better. It's my thing. It's this remote work thing is family friendliness and a greater focus on results, and thus a better efficiency, for example, and things like this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Uta, I think that there's some other trends that have happened that are not just remote work, and other sort of with sort of immigration policy and so forth, all of which are really bring into question about whether we're getting towards a more family-friendly work situation or not, and sort of a life-work balance, which I think, Michael, it's very encouraging to hear that, and I think there's a lot of accuracy in that interpretation. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the balances or pressures that are beginning to arise on the workforce.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has shown that, has made pressures more visible than before, in particular in terms of work-life balance. And what we can see in Germany, and I think in some other countries as well, I'm not so sure about the US, is that women have taken over more than half of the burden of homeschooling and caring for kids and elderly during the time of the lockdown, because yeah, home office is not always the solution or the only solution. When two people work at home and one has kids running around and the other not, it makes a difference, of course, how good you can do your work at home. And we also see, there was evidence from the US as well that in academia, for example, female researchers submitted fewer papers and fewer research proposals than before in relation to men. So they obviously had a disadvantage during the lockdown period. And we also see that you mentioned migration issues, Ray. In Germany, a lot of care work is done by migrants from Eastern Europe or other countries migrating to Germany to do care work there, in private households in particular, and they were not able, or they were not allowed to migrate during the lockdown phases, and even now it's very difficult. So there's another resource breaking away, and families cannot rely on this kind of support. So it has a lot of impact, gender specific impact for people who do all kinds of care work, for example. And as far as social service sector jobs are concerned, they are typically, in Germany, they are typically female jobs, and we know that the salaries are too low if you compare it to the demands of these jobs. And I hope that there is a window of opportunities now to do something for better salaries in these jobs. And I see that people in these jobs, they have a stronger self-confidence now, and they require more higher salaries. I hope they will be successful, because we have seen how much we depend on this kind of jobs in our societies.
Mm-hmm.
Very much. So I'm gonna, at this point, I don't have another question that just came up, but I think that there's an opportunity here for almost the lightning round. Just if there's one thing that you could tell people to be looking at or trying to address, the sort of the famous statement, never waste a good crisis. So how to not waste a good crisis in this case, which is a hard way to speak, and because I don't mean to be insensitive, because of course nobody would ask for a crisis of this kind globally, and the impacts on people's lives, but we are in it. And so so you've all talked about some things we may be learning, or some things that may, trends that could be positive, or trends that are negative that we need to respond to. I mean, one thing, what you were just speaking about, Uta, the informal economy is a huge part of the care economy, and that's where it's anecdotal, though I think there is also statistical work on this, that in the US, there's been huge people that their incomes have faded because of the decisions that have been made. So what if you had one thing to say, how we're going to come out of this better, so to speak? What would you pick? And I'm going to start with you, Samantha.
It's a tough question. I think I want to really think more expansively about what it might mean if, again, sort of hypothetically, there is a shift in sort of more knowledge economy type workers towards secondary cities. perhaps post-industrial cities to places where there was not a high concentration of, sort of high-income, white-collar work before. And I think that has potentially two consequences. One is the question of what kinds of industries can then maybe be supported and grow there. For instance, like in upstate New York, there's a lot of adaptive reuse around the sort of artisanal food economy, as well as the biotech manufacturing economy that draws on a lot of the universities that are in the area. And then to think about, for instance, like what is the draw of a place like New York City, the energy, and what does that mean? It might mean co-working spaces amongst like-minded people, and trying to think about, well, other types of reuse that might not necessarily have seemed like possibilities absent the migration of different types of workers.
All right, that's good. Thank you very much. That's you brought in adaptive reuse, which we sort of touched on, but that's also a physical implication, that these huge resources that we have of built landscapes that are now underutilized and also in economically depressed, and we're always looking for adaptive reuse for them. And this may be sort of even taking it more seriously and really seeing the opportunity there as for work, as well as for sort of just the overall community economic health. Michael, you've touched on my question in a couple of your comments already, and it helped inspire it really. So, but you got to pick one thing that you really want people to walk away with from this, to think harder about how we come back better. Maybe we're already there, as you indicated, in many ways. Michael, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Let me point out something about my theme of climate impacts. This pandemic has a lot to do with climate impacts also, and that of course with the future of work and also with the future of planning. And when we come up how the shift of working from one part to the other, we have a long tradition in the city of Dortmund with a structural change, and we shifted work from heavy industry to high technology work, to IT centers, universities, big logistic companies, and things like this. But now we have a new situation, and this new situation, let me refer on an example to our city center now, in the CBD and also in the suburbs of Dortmund. And there is a very big change in retail work now, and there's because of this, there is a decline also. There's a spatial change, of course, and for example, for the downtown department stores, and we ask now ourselves, what is the reuse of these areas, and what are the consequences? And due to this bankruptcy, is it the right term, of many retail shops, we are gaining space in our centers. Apart, of course, from the loss of the jobs, there are effects that are of great importance for planning, and which we have the possibility as a city to protect and strengthens our very dense city centers against climate change. And apart from the loss of the revenue, what speaks against cities buying up these vacancies, this space, and making them available for measures to create city work, a city worth living in, or to create new jobs, or to create bicycle paths, or roof gardens, parks, and green spaces, and so on. So we get, how you can say, there may be with this change, maybe we have a discovery of proximity, if this is the right term. What I mean, discovering its surroundings, rereading and interpreting them was, in my opinion, what was new about Corona. I hope it's understandable. Suddenly people have realized that the many journeys are not really necessary. Sometimes it's just a matter of prestige. A declaration has taken place, and that has a lot to do with the future of work, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. That's, I mean, like the rediscovery of proximity and the practice of it is very, very thoughtful. Grant, can you do a quick, we're running a little bit short on time, and then I'm going to end with Uda on this one. But Grant, if you could just give me a quick one.
Yeah, briefly, I would just say one of the things that the pandemic has said is that, you know, that stresses, if left unchecked, are compounded by a shock event. And we've seen that as a result of the pandemic, basically, you know, highlighting the structural inequalities amongst gender and race in the United States, as well as kind of economic imbalances in business models in hospitality and education and medicine, and also kind of the retail space. I would say kind of two things. One is we're starting this in Pittsburgh as a guaranteed income pilot to really find the ways to help to build and strengthen kind of the social safety net that could help bolster people when there is disruptions. We know there will be more. That is one of the kind of the key pieces of kind of our work and resilience, is that there is always going to be shocks. There's always going to be stresses. How do you best prepare for them? And then, you know, just building a little bit off of Michael's kind of piece, I would say this idea of integrating, you know, nature into the design of our cities, or kind of the biophilic practice, so that we can take advantage of kind of the surroundings around us to basically build cities that are one with nature, helps us both kind of buttress ourselves against kind of, you know, future climate shocks, but also create more livable places, as well as great places to work.
Well, you know, it's amazing. I mean, I know many of you are interested in the guaranteed income question. I mean, it was, I hate, I'm not going to tell you the date, but it was the debate topic in high school many decades ago. It's a topic that is, it's back, and this COVID is actually bringing it back in a way that people are taking it much more seriously in Germany, as well as Michael and others have noted. So Uda, Grant just said biophilic practices and guaranteed income. So what do you have that we should learn and do?
What should we learn? I think the pandemic is a kind of involuntary stop signal to all of us, and each and all of us, everybody has the necessity, but also the chance to rethink his or her kind of living. And we have to find out for ourselves what does work mean for us. Is the way I work the way I want to work, or what can I change? What does family and caring mean to me, and do I want to change something? We see a lot of solidarity, intergenerational solidarity, interfamily solidarity. So this might change something to the positive. And it's also a way, an opportunity to think about how we deal with environmental issues like climate, and do we have to do all these kind of journeys and traveling, or can we do more in remote options and so on? So it's a chance to rethink our life.
Thank you very much. All right. One word.
Yeah, well, just thinking about where we consume our resources, electricity and so on. You know, that's something that thinking about climate has to change.
Pretty foundational. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to turn it, thank you all the speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Peter because we're at time. Thank you so much for your great comments today.
Thank you very much, Ray. Great job moderating. Thank you, Samantha, Ute, Grant, and Michael. And thanks to the audience. I want to point out one event that we are organizing together with the German Center for Research and Innovation is the Future Forum in the middle of October. If you are interested in what the green city of the future might look like and related topics, check it out. I send you the link in our chat box. And thanks again for a wonderful conversation. We'll have more of these events. Shoot me an email if you want to find out about our work and what other events we plan. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to the speakers again. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.